Welcome to all of you who are joining in live in today's session. We're going to talk about gut health and why that is so important to our overall health and well-being. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Carin Söderberg and I'm one of the wellbeing coaches here at Wellbeing People. Now, of course, at Wellbeing People, we strive to try and empower and inspire as many of you as possible to live your very best lives for the longest. So our gut health is a massive part of that. So I hope today's session, our short webinar, is going to be beneficial and interesting, and hopefully share some things that we weren't aware of before. I'm pretty certain that many of you joining in today we'll have come across loads of information in media. Gut microbiome, gut health has been a really hot topic over the last few years, and there's more and more research coming out all the time, and we're learning more and more about how our gut impacts on our overall health and well-being. So I've opened that chat function to say hi there if you want to, but please use the chat function if you like throughout the session to post any questions you might have or anything that you want to share in there. Okay, so we've got loads to talk about today. I hope it's going to be interesting. I'm very excited to introduce to you our guest speaker today, Susie Willows. Susie, are you there? There you are, fabulous. Hi, Susie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out of your day to share your knowledge and expertise with us. For all our viewers, could you please just introduce yourself and just let us know who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Susie Willows. I'm a naturopathic nutritional therapist and also a breathwork specialist. So I work with people using naturopathic principles, which is sort of understanding the body has an innate ability to heal. We look at the root cause of any symptoms and look at the body as a whole rather than looking at an individual part of the body. And then, it's really just as Karin has said about wellbeing people, educating the client. So it's not coming to see me forever. It's about working together, but then educating you to be your best doctor.
Oh, fabulous. That's what we're all missing so often, isn't it? That connection and understanding how all the different things that we do and are exposed to how that all impacts and brings us together. So how did you get involved with all of this? What brought on this journey and this interest in you?
So I'm sure some of the listeners today or the viewers will be sat at their desks, maybe eating a sandwich at the same time, maybe doing emails at the same time and multitasking like we all do. And that was me. I was a complete, stress bunny, had a lot going on. And then I thought, oh, I'll go and see a nutritional therapist because although I'm fine, I'm really interested in food and nutrition and things. And she said to me, oh, you really aren't fine. Your body is showing really strong signs of stress. You're pretty much knocking on the door of chronic fatigue. And so I think my initial reaction to that was very defensive and I didn't really do very much. But she did plant the seed to think, okay, maybe, I should go to the doctor like she suggested. And so I went to the doctor who said, oh, you've got low iron, you've got low this, low that. And I thought, oh, okay. And so I think that one consultation just sent me on a path of self-healing. And so it wasn't a rapid change, but then as I started to change things in my life, I found that I was less tired, I was less achy, I my allergies disappeared, and so all of those things over time massively improved. And then, fast forward kind of 10 years, I feel like I've successfully getting through menopause without some of the horrible symptoms that people experience. And I've retrained, so I'm now a naturopathic nutritional therapist. And the breath work for me was a really core part of healing that overactive stress response. So then I've brought that into my practice.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because you were saying that at the start of your journey, you thought, I'm fine. I'm just a bit interested in nutrition, and you learn these things that, and it's so common for many of us, isn't it? Because we're so busy and we kind of get used to just dealing with perhaps low energy, fatigue, low mood, it's all part of every day. And we so rarely get the opportunity to just pause and come up for air a bit and just check in with ourselves, how we're actually doing. So Thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. So let's dive right into our topic and just ask, what actually is gut health? Let's just clear up what we mean when we say gut health. Why do we need to know about it?
So, when we talk about gut health, we're really thinking of the entire digestive system. So, you're thinking about, from the mouth all the way down the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, because all of that entire system is responsible for how we digest and absorb our food. So, in my instance, I was eating a pretty good diet. I was pretty happy with myself, to be honest. And then it turns out that I wasn't actually absorbing the food that I was eating because my digestive system wasn't working properly. So the digestive system goes all the way through, if something isn't working well in your stomach, then it's going to knock on further down. If you're not properly chewing your food, it's going to knock on in the stomach. So that's what we mean by gut health is the entire digestive system. There's a lot of talk of the microbiome, and that's really looking more at the colon, which is the kind of last bit of the digestive system.
Yeah, yeah. So of course that's a word, and I'll come back to you a bit later on because that's really interesting about you saying that you kept a good diet and thought you ate healthily but weren't able to absorb the nutrients. And we'll come back to that. But yeah, let's pause a little bit on gut microbiome because that's of course something that we hear a lot of talk about these days and supporting our gut microbiome by eating certain things. So that's so what actually is that? You said it's in the colon.
So yeah, so we have different microbiomes in the body, on our skin, we have an oral microbiome, we have one within our airway, our tracts, but the one that's getting a lot of press at the moment is this gut microbiome. And within our gut, we have bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, all kind of living happily as part of our body. And everybody will have a different microbiome. It will be influenced by our genetics, by our environment, by our diet. There are so many things that will influence what is living in our gut.
Mm,
And it's a comparatively new science. So, we've known forever that gut health is important, but this science of the microbiome is comparatively new.
yeah.
But now we're learning more and more what a crucial role it plays in the digestion and absorption of our food. So, just to give a few examples, for example, when we eat fiber, our body can't digest it, but
Mm,
then it's the good gut bacteria that digest that fiber. They can then create short chain fatty acids. Try not to get too technical here, but those are these little things that go around the body doing good things. So they reduce inflammation, they can help to improve your mood, they can help brain health and brain plasticity, and they help to keep the gut healthy. So although we used to think fiber doesn't matter because we can't digest it, it's now completely turned on its head. And it's like fiber is really important because it can feed all these microbes in the gut that are doing the good jobs.
so
Some of
fiber
the
is
other
really
jobs,
important.
oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say some of the other things is it actually helps to make vitamins. So coming back to me being low energy, some of your B vitamins are made in the gut by the microbiome. So again,
Right.
if you haven't got a healthy gut, you're going to eat the good food, but you're not going to be able to get that manufacture of vitamins from the food. So your vitamin K and your B vitamins are manufactured partially in the gut. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, and so, it also helps to release your digestive enzymes, and they're the bits that break down the food. So this whole microbiome is
Mm.
absolutely crucial to being able to digest and absorb our food, which then gives us energy.
So it's all the details behind, of course, what we eat is going to impact how we feel and how our gut feels if we're struggling with, bloating or indigestion and things like that. But it's also, what we're eating that are impacting on that ability to absorb the nutrients and actually make the most of the good food that we're consuming. So of course, most of us will think about gut health and think about nutrition. But you just mentioned also that connection with your brain health, with the fiber intake and your gut microbiome. So, what is the impact on it? Why does your gut matter so much to your health and well-being? That's a big question. But what are all the different impacts that we see depending on the state of our gut, if you like?
So I think there's two things there. Firstly, there's the vagus nerve that connects the brain and the gut. And what many people don't realize is 80% of the communication is from the gut to the brain, and 20% is from the brain down to the gut. So it's constantly communicating, and the gut is constantly communicating with the brain. And then in the gut is also responsible for manufacturing our hormones and our neurotransmitters. So not all of them, but like serotonin, 95% of serotonin is manufactured in the gut. Now, serotonin helps to regulate mood. You've got dopamine manufactured in the gut. That's motivation. So you've got all these neurotransmitters that are really relying on a healthy gut to be able to be made to support the brain. So that's one of the key factors that is where the gut can influence the brain health.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Things that I think maybe most of us are probably not aware of how that impacts, on our well-being. I just pausing there for a second because I noticed there's a question popped up in the Q&A. If you've got questions, of course, use the chat function, the Q&A as well. Maybe just a really, okay, this is a big question, but I'll pose it anyway before we get into some of the details. But it's asking, can you explain about leaky gut, please? I suffer from severe psoriasis and I've heard the term, and I would like to get away from steroids and look at the food I'm eating. So I don't know if there's a quick answer to that, but also, again, it's
Ish,
it's
okay.
a term that we've probably all heard. So yeah.
So where I was talking about the gut microbiome, you want your microbiome to be balanced between the beneficial bacteria and the less beneficial bacteria. And so long as you have sufficient of the beneficial, then the not so good are okay. They just, they're kept in check. But what happens is you can get an imbalance of gut bacteria, and that's where then the less beneficial bacteria can proliferate. And
Right.
we see a lot of this now because the less beneficial, like sugar, ultra processed foods, all of those things that are we have quite a lot in our environment these days. If you get this imbalance, it can lead to something like called leaky gut. And what happens is because you've got this imbalance in the gut, the really tight junctions that enable the nutrients from the food to get through into the bloodstream system, but not the food, they open up a bit. And so then small, tiny particles of food are getting through into the blood system. And that triggers an immune response. So suddenly your immune system that was quite happily ticking along is finding these foreign bits of food and it's not sure what to do with them. So it starts to get overactive and really over responsive. And then that overactivity can then contribute to the development of autoimmune conditions. So if ever I see someone with an autoimmune condition, I would be looking at the gut, because healing the gut is the key to sort of stopping and calming down that inflammation in the body, because the inflammation is essentially an immune response.
Mm.
So in answer to that question, yes, absolutely, you can look at diet and other ways to help support psoriasis. Psoriasis is a particularly, it's not a quick fix, and that will be part of the message today is
Yeah.
that, healing a gut is not, there's not a quick fix, but you can do it gradually to help heal it, and it's definitely a worthwhile investment, in my opinion.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for that. I think that leads really nicely to another question that popped up as well. If there are foods and drinks that negatively impact on our gut microbiome, and does processed foods have an impact? So just really quickly, you can just touch on that. I think you mentioned a little bit already.
Yeah, so apologies, guys. It's going to be the stuff you like. So alcohol, processed foods, sugar, really what you need to feed the gut. If I go on the positive, what the gut likes is fruit, vegetables, whole grains, pulses, beans, lentils, all of that contain the fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria.
Yeah. Okay. Fabulous. Thank you. We also had a question there just to clarify what an autoimmune condition is. And of course, autoimmune conditions are instances where your body sort of attacks itself, and might, destroy healthy tissues or create illnesses in response to some of that, inflammation that might occur. Now, of course, it's a really broad spectrum, and there's, genetics that play a big part as well, but there are certain things perhaps that we do, and without sounding too harsh, because I know we all live in the same world and we all live with the same types of stresses and the same types of food, but there can be an impact as well. So I suppose if you're living with, and if you want to touch on that, if you're living with autoimmune conditions, if you can do anything to support yourself depending on what that condition might be, or if you just want to explain very quickly what it is.
Well, I think you started,
Yeah.
Carin, explaining, but yeah, essentially, an autoimmune condition might be something like oh, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, and it's where the immune system is starting to attack itself. Hypothyroidism is autoimmune, and then where the immune system is attacking itself, the conventional way to address that is through steroids to damp down this immune reaction. So if you were to come, say, for example, and work with me, what I would look at is why is the immune system overactive? And one of the reasons why that can be is if you have this leaky gut that I described, where you're getting food particles into the bloodstream, which is then triggering that immune reaction. So it's all like a little cascade that knocks on.
Right, fabulous. Thank you for that. So I guess, as you were saying right at the start, many of us, we live stressful lives, we eat on the go, rush, rush, rush. We might not have, loads of time. We might not even be aware, like you were saying, that our gut health isn't great. So what would be sort of signs and symptoms that we'd be aware of?
So there's the obvious things. So you might have reflux, you might have bloating, gas, burping after food. So the obvious digestive symptoms or
Hmm.
pain. But then it's not always that. I didn't have any digestive symptoms, but I was tired. I had achy joints. So it's not always the obvious thing. I heard something quite recently that I thought was quite interesting because it definitely applied to me. It said, when the body whispers, listen, because otherwise it will need to shout. And
Reality.
you have these little symptoms that you ignore in the hope that they'll go away. But
Yeah.
often they don't go away and then they will cascade onto something else. And it might seem unrelated, but the body is a whole amazing interconnected system. So everything knocks on everything else.
Yeah, okay. Amazing. We've touched a little bit about stress, so I want to move on to how we can sort of connect the dots with our gut health and that health impact. So we've touched a little bit about, the stress that we all live with, of course, daily and how we manage that. But can you explain a little bit more detail the impact that stress and what we mean by stress and what impact that has on your gut and then
Hmm,
later on your overall well-being?
good question. I mean, stress is a good one because often when you say stress, people think work, boss, like that typical
Yeah,
stress.
busy. Yeah,
But we have a lot of other stresses that A might be going on in the background that we're not aware of, or B, we don't traditionally think of as a stress. So, for example, if your diet is wholly comprised of ultra processed foods, that will put a stress on the body because the body is having to detox all the chemicals that are in that food. So that would be a stress on the body. If you have a very high carbohydrate diet and your blood sugar will be going up, then it will be crashing, then it will be up, then it will be crashing. Again, that's going to put a stress on the body. Poor sleep would be another stressor. Even extreme exercise, we live in an
mm,
environment where it's good to go and like cane it down the gym, but actually,
absolutely. Yeah.
for me, where I was at, where my adrenals were on the floor, intense exercise wasn't the right thing for me at that time. Um, and then how it knocks on. So stress is the response that we have, it's ancient response to respond to a threat controlled by our subconscious. So traditionally, there might have been a predator. All our energy would have been diverted to our heart and our lungs to enable us to run away from that predator. And then it goes back to normal. So it's like if you see any animal, if you've got a dog, they might have meet another dog and then afterwards they always shake it out to
Yeah.
release the stress. And as humans, we don't always do that. So we've had this rush. and then we just store it in the body and we don't
Mm.
complete that stress cycle,
Yeah.
or we just are permanently stressed because we're doing 100 things at once and we're always in this heightened state of fight or flight.
Mm.
So, in relation to digestion, when you're in fight or flight, the energy is going to your heart and your lungs to enable you to run away. And any long-term projects are put on hold. So, there's no energy going to your immune system. There's no energy going to your digestion because at that moment, they're not really what the problem is. The problem is, I need to run away from a predator. So,
Mm.
then as the energy is diverted away, as in my case, you have poor digestion and absorption because there's no energy going to that digestive system when you're eating. So then you start to get low energy, you feel a bit run down. It then impacts on your gut microbiome that we were talking about earlier because you're going to start getting an imbalance perhaps because your food isn't digesting properly. It starts to ferment. The fermentation creates gas, so then that can cause bloating. And then it knocks on your brain health. So you start to get anxiety or brain fog, and then you get more stressed. So you then end up in this vicious cycle where the stress is sort of going round, diverting the energy away from digestion, which then makes the gut health worse, which
Mm.
makes the brain health worse. So in terms of, healing, I always start by looking at the nervous system, how someone's stress is before we might even go to food, because you really need to get that in place
Yeah.
first before you start to look at all the other bits of the picture.
And I suppose that can be easier said than done, right? And you made a good point there about the world we live in is very much, like play hard all the time. We work, we have to be productive all the time. We want to seem to be productive, and we go straight from work to a really hard session in the gym because we think we're doing something really beneficial for our health, but we might just be adding to that strain and feeding, the cortisol and the adrenaline and all of those stress hormones and maintaining in that fight or flight. So what's the sort of crucial thing that we can remember to check in with our stress, which I suggest, we should try and do throughout the day. So what's the kind of key thing to manage the stress?
I think the first thing is to become aware. So to pause and think, how am I feeling and am I very stressed? And there are certain things like job. You can't just get rid of a job if it's stressful. So there are some things that you can just park and think, well, for now, but are there techniques that I can put in place that might help me manage work stress, like making sure I get out at lunchtime and go for a walk, even if it's only for 10 minutes, it breaks up that stress. And then for the out of work, it's finding any stress busting techniques that you enjoy. So if you enjoy exercise, yes, go and do it. It might make you feel better, but just listen to your body. If you do exercise and you're completely on the floor afterwards, it may be a signal that that intense exercise isn't necessarily the best exercise for you.
Mm.
And then, I mean, in relation to just eating, the really easiest hack that I have is just pause before you eat and take some deep breaths. And when you breathe out, when you exhale, you're stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. And then when you inhale, you're stimulating the sympathetic. So if you take an inhale for 4 and then an exhale for 8, and just do that a few times before you eat, you're sending a signal to your subconscious, rest and digest. And so that is my first tip for everybody is before you eat, just make sure you're in rest and
And
digest.
that's such an easy thing to do as well, because, often there are so many things that we need to fit in and remember to do, but something as simple as, sitting down before your meal and just, spending maybe a minute or two just taking a couple of deep breaths into your diaphragm, just slowly breathing in and just expanding that exhalation. That's some really simple, easy advice that probably most of us will be able to fit into our day. So that's really great. Now, there's a few questions around sort of foods that we, should eat that are particularly beneficial. I know you've touched on obviously vegetables, fruits, and fiber in general. But there's also a few questions coming in around weight loss. So also, are there particular foods that can help with sort of bloated tummy, not being able to shake off the weight? Also, that particular question is from somebody who might be dealing with menopausal symptoms as well. Um, but also a question around weight loss and how that is associated with our gut microbiome. So, how to maintain gut health when a person relies on takeaways. Oh, I think you've given yourself the answer there. There might be time to try and reprioritize your time and maybe a bit of cooking. But if you want to touch a little bit on just the relation between, weight loss, the foods we eat, and our gut microbiome or gut health in general.
So, so the at the beginning when I was talking about the gut microbiome, I said that where you eat the fiber from your fruit and your vegetables and your nuts and your seeds and your pulses, that is feeding the beneficial bacteria that then creates these short chain fatty acids, for example, butyrate. And that then goes around the body and does all good jobs. And that actually helps to influence the GLP-1 receptors, which suddenly everyone knows about because that's the weight loss jabs.
Oh, of course,
And so
yes.
actually a healthy gut helps to stimulate those, which helps to manage your satiety and your appetite. So it can help with food cravings and things like that. And it can contribute to weight loss. I mean, weight loss is a whole topic in itself and it is very complex. So I'm not about to say heal your gut and the weight will fall off, but it is one part of the picture
Mm,
and it can be helpful. So
yeah.
that is how the gut microbiome fits in there.
So how do we maintain gut health when a person relies on takeaways? I'm going back to your question there. Of course, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to rely on takeaways, but sometimes our life circumstances, people work in shifts, we have lots of responsibilities going on. It's not as easy as just saying, just cook all your healthy, nutritious meals from scratch using all the lovely organic vegetables each and every day. So what can we do to just make sure that we support our gut health, even though, our nutrition might not always be tip top?
So there's two answers here. The first answer is, so I had a client who relied on takeaways, and what we did is we just took out one takeaway. We did it slowly. So start by going, this week, one meal, I'm not going to have a takeaway. I'm going to find an alternative, or I'm going to prep something before I go to work, and then I can have it then. So that's one way, is just don't go full on and stop the takeaways, but just introduce slowly. The other one, what I do is I take fruit and veg capsules, and they are fabulous because it's essentially a capsule that's got your fruit and veg, your 30 varieties. So it's not as good as the real thing, but for someone who's really busy, wants to start focusing on their gut health and would like a hack, then it's a really good alternative. So if
Oh,
you're
okay. So
interested in
that's
learning about that one, you can just message me after and I can tell you. But that is
okay.
one
Yeah,
way.
that's really fabulous because there are loads of these types. Obviously, there are lots of supplements that promise the world, and we're not going to encourage anybody to start, just popping a pill and carry on as we are normally. We do need to address our stress levels and our nutrition and all of those things, our sleep and movement and all the stuff that is so beneficial to our health and well-being. But it's nice to know that there are some things that might be able to support us. So, of course. There are all these types of greens powders. Would that be beneficial thing as well?
Yeah, they can be. The supplement market is growing very rapidly.
Yeah.
And sadly, from my perspective, Big Pharma are buying out quite a few of the supplement companies. So I think it is, and supplements are expensive. So I would always say, go and see a nutritional therapist because then you'd find the right supplements for you.
Yes, of
I
course.
work in a health food shop, and I know what is on TikTok by what people come in and ask about,
Oh, wow.
basically. So,
Yeah.
they all come in and go, oh, I've seen this on TikTok or I've seen that on TikTok. But then because they come into the health food shop, I can ask about their symptoms and find out if that actually is the right thing for them. But there's no
Yeah.
one thing that is good for
That's going to just work
everybody.
for everybody. As is this with everything when it comes to our well-being. Of course, we're all individual. We respond differently to the foods that we eat. What works for one person is not necessarily going to work for you. But of course, there are some general advice that we all would benefit from. So yeah, there's a comment there as well suggesting maybe, if we are relying on on takeaways than choosing, the best option that you can find, and perhaps also experimenting with these home delivery boxes where you do have to do a bit of you have to do the cooking yourself, but perhaps the ingredients you at least know what goes into it. So helpful tip from one of our viewers there. Okay, let's go on and move on to go a little bit deeper into, what we can do ourselves. Just follow on to how we action this. So we've talked a little bit around weight loss, and are there any general kind of misconceptions or myths when it comes to our gut health that you come across that maybe we just want to clear up?
There are misconceptions or myths. I think in the general, the TikTok world, it might be, well, there's this one thing that will help. And I don't think it's ever one thing because, as I said, the body is complex. We're all very different. So it would be a combination of your hydration, your exercise, your diet, your environment at home, what cosmetics do you use even because there's chemicals in cosmetics and that will have an impact, so it's a whole world. Just like the microbiome is very diverse, the way that we live and its influence will be diverse too. So I guess the what I see is sometimes people will say, oh, well, I've taken out gluten and it hasn't made a difference. And you think, well, gluten often can be part of the problem, but it's never the whole problem. So it's really looking at the whole picture
Yeah.
to find a
And I
solution.
suppose when we have a perfectly functioning immune system and gut microbiome, then we're okay to eat anything, aren't we? Okay, that's really, really interesting. Just very quickly on these questions here as well, and just as we were touching on bioindividuality and not everything is going to work for the same people. And of course, somebody has posted in the chat here as well about of having major bowel surgeries and is now not able to consume a lot of fiber, needs to follow a low fiber diet. So any bright ideas is the question there, to support your gut health as much as possible in that circumstance.
So I am not an expert on the bowel surgery. I think you can still have soluble fiber. It's the types of fiber. And if you wanted to get in touch with me, I could check whether these fruit and vegetable caps would help you because they do provide the fiber, but it's just the soluble fiber. So I know,
Yeah.
or after bowel surgery, you do have to be very careful with the fiber, obviously.
Yeah. So right at the end, when we wrap up with the session, we'll share Susie's contact details. If you've got further questions and specific questions that are personal to you as well, you can get in touch with her. Um, Also around exercise. So can we touch a little bit about exercise and how that can benefit? So I'm thinking things like, spending time in nature is really beneficial to loads of parts of our well-being and parts of our supporting our gut health as well. So exercise in general, when is it good? When is it too much? But also for somebody like yourself who were mindful of your adrenals and stress levels, what sort of exercises would you suggest maybe doing? I'm thinking, obviously, just going for quiet walks, doing yoga, things like that. There's also a comment there about laughter therapy. I think that's a whole other topic as well, but that sounds like fun. But just generally supporting our stress levels and our adrenals. Is there anything we should think about when it comes to perhaps when we're exercising or when we're eating in terms of exercise?
Oh, there was a lot in there, Karen.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
I would say,
Getting 10
in
questions in
terms of
one.
exercise, like the being outside thing, if you think of your subconscious, so that controls everything about our nervous system. It actually controls about 80% of just day to day how we are. But being outside is our natural environment. So as soon as you're outside, your subconscious is going, I can relax. We're not naturally designed to be inside the whole time. So just getting out in nature, irrespective of what you're doing, is going to help to calm that stress system and calm that nervous system. So walking in nature or getting out and exercising in nature, you then get the double benefit because you get the benefit of the exercise and you get the benefit of the nature. I don't want people to go away and think, oh, I can't do intensive exercise because it
Yeah,
can be good.
of course. Yeah.
But I think if you're doing intense exercise and afterwards you're exhausted, properly exhausted, then maybe that's your body saying, whoa, I didn't really need to do that. So then I would just switch to more, yoga, walking, just gentler exercises and see how you feel doing them. Strength exercise is really important as you get older because it helps to keep your bones strong and your muscles strong. So I think is it about 30 when it starts to go downhill. So we're all supposed to be doing
Right.
strength exercises from that age.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I can't remember what else you asked.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And we're so bad at this, unfortunately, but listening into your body, it's not a competition, it's not a race. We know we need to do exercise, absolutely. Get as much movement and exercise as you can. But if you're dealing with loads of stress at work or at home, and you are also trying to beat yourself up in the gym and you are constantly exhausted, that might be a good idea to perhaps give yourself a little break and do some gentler forms of exercise. There's a comment there as well about HRV and whether that's it. So for those of you who are into your tech and your wearables, monitoring your heart rate variability, which is a bit of a next step, can be really, really beneficial. And it will tell you, if you don't know yourself or able to read those signals from your body, how your stress levels are doing and how well you're coping with that. So yeah, absolutely, that can be an interesting way, and it can give you an indication of when you should exercise and when it's a good idea to slow down. I'll also mention that for women who are menstruating, it's really beneficial to also track your cycle and to know when is a good time of the month for you to get all of those high energy, high impact competitive exercises in, and when it is more beneficial to do more gentler yoga and walking and things like that. Right, okay, so let's go back to, so we've touched a little bit on the types of foods that we should eat, the connection with weight loss, our stress levels, of course, which is it's a huge part, and using our breath to calm down our stress levels. And of course, that's something what Susie just mentioned before you eat, of just taking a few slow breaths in and out through your nose, just counting in for four and just making sure that your exhale is longer. That's beneficial to do throughout the day at any time when you're feeling a bit overwhelmed as a reactive response to your stress. But Susie, before we start rounding up, some top tips. So we've gone through quite a few of them. Um, we've talked about movement. Of course, there's sleep. We've talked about, but what about when and how we eat? Does that matter as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my pet hates where people see something on the internet and then they
Mm,
do it and I come back to we're all different. And so,
yeah.
for example, there's a lot about fasting and fasting, particularly an overnight fast can be really helpful. Say, for example, if you were trying to lose weight, but for someone who's more underweight than overweight, it might be a really bad idea. So how we eat can be really important. So the most important thing would be de-stress. So do the breaths before you eat.
Mm,
And the other thing is when in between meals, so we've sort of been encouraged to snack, but
yeah.
actually just having 3 meals a day and not snacking in between, the body does this kind of clean sweep of the whole digestive system in between every meal, and it takes a couple of hours. So if you're snacking, it doesn't have a chance to just clear out all the rubbish and get it going again. So I would say don't snack, but there's a caveat because, like, for someone like me, I actually need to snack because I'm quite small and I need it for my energy. So everybody is different. But if you wanted a general rule, I would say make sure you have a good gap between meals. Generally, a good fast overnight again helps the digestive system to have a break, but there are always exceptions to every rule.
Yes, of course. So always just kind of check in. And I think that's such an important point, and something that I am always saying as well, that just because you've seen somebody on social media do something, and people are passionate and they feel very strongly, and they do think that their way of doing things is the only way to do it. And of course, we've all seen, like you said, the people who are telling you that intermittent fasting is the most important thing that you can do. And then you scroll up and the next person is saying, oh, you're a woman in menopause, you have to eat breakfast. And then so it's really confusing. So it's really just about, trying to listen, maybe listen to your gut. What does your
Yeah.
instinct tell you? What feels what feels right for you, but just having that mindfulness of slowing down when you're eating, because even if you're eating the most nutritious foods, you might not be able to make the most of those nutrients, absorb those nutrients if you are eating on the go, rushing around, being stressed out. So just try and find that calmness and that peace into our lives as much as we can. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to start wrapping up. And I want us to, if you've got any final questions for Susie, do post them now. If you've attended our webinars before, you know, we always keep mentioning 1% progress experiments. And that's because we know that simplicity is, of course, what leads to sustainability in the long run. And we're not expecting anybody to go out tomorrow and completely change their entire lives and try and do everything differently, because that's unlikely to last very long. But if we can just experiment with one small thing, just 10 minutes a day, just to try and get a new habit to stick, that is absolutely worth doing. So as we start rounding up, Susie, I'd like to ask you what might be the most important and meaningful message that people can take away from the session, and indeed a few simple things that we can start experimenting with, whether that is, you know, introducing a certain type of food or something to think about in terms of our health well-being, something that people can take away that would be really easy to implement into your life. What
Okay,
would
so
it be?
I'll go with the easy because
Yeah.
I'm realistic about people's lives and things. So the first, my absolute top one would be the stop before a meal and breathe and make sure you're in rest and digest. I just saw it ping up there saying, does eating slowly help? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So eat without distraction. My kids are terrible. I just have to go with it. But you know, just eat and enjoy the food. So really find food you love and enjoy it, but find food that loves you. So then at the end of the meal, just pause again and think, how do I feel? Do I feel exhausted? Do I feel energized? Am I bloated? And like some people, for example, might struggle with metabolizing fat. So they might think fish and chips lovely and feel terrible after, but salad great. Or, you know, so notice what really likes you, and then you can steer your diet because the body is always communicating. So it will be saying, this is
Yeah.
how I feel after that meal, but we don't stop and listen. I never did because I was too busy.
Yeah. I mean, as with everything, we really need to make a conscious decision to sort of pause and actually pay some attention to these issues. And of course, it's very true as well that you were saying, you know, eat the food you love, but also the food that is going to love you. And it can be a process of changing your eating habits and you know your taste buds, if you like. But isn't it true also that, you know, we can quite quickly start changing over those? So just for a simple, like, I don't consume fizzy drinks in either form, but just a couple of weeks ago I was out somewhere and I thought, "Do you know what, I actually fancy, I'm gonna have, I think I had like a, you know, a 7 Up or something. So I fancy that." And I just took a sip and I thought, oh, it's awful. And I thought I just hadn't had, you know, a sweet fizzy drink for so long. And I had a memory that that was going to feel really nice and refreshing, but I couldn't finish it. I thought it was disgusting. So maybe also starting to introduce some small changes and see how you get used to them.
Fizzy drinks would be a good start because particularly if they've got sweeteners in, sweeteners
Yeah.
destroy the gut. And
Mhm.
to me, they're an easier one than alcohol for a lot of people, but they're not really that great. Yeah, try kombucha. There's loads. So I
Love
said I work in a
kombucha.
health food shop. We have a whole range of kombuchas and all the works of kind of fizzy drinks, but are tipping into the, you know, functional drinks you can now get.
Yeah, and really delicious. And you know, something that you can experiment with making at home as well if you're keen on that. So there's been a few questions around. I know we're running out of time, so we're going to wrap up quite shortly. But there's been a few comments around ultra processed foods. That's such a big topic in itself. You know, what actually, you know, are these vegan sausages, you know, ultra processed foods? I think in general terms, there's a quite a broad scale, of course, when we, you know, most foods are processed in some way, but so I've got a fairly good idea, I think, about the types of things that you want to be aware of. My first advice would be to, you know, read the labels and actually check, you know, what's in the food and if you've recognized those ingredients. But seriously, are there any particular things that we should try and avoid when it comes to ultra processed foods, or any particular ingredients that are less beneficial to our gut?
Um, so we touched on sweeteners. So I think people thought sweeteners were good because it wasn't sugar, but actually now
Yeah.
there's more evidence that they destroy the gut microbiome. So sweeteners aren't great. I think Karin's advice, which is the less ingredients, the better. So the closer to a whole food you can be, the better. And I think, there's a movement that says, oh, vegan or vegetarian is good. But in my opinion, vegan or vegetarian sausages where you've just processed it up and took it into the sausage is you do better just to get the fruit or the vegetable, get the food itself and have the whole food. So if you wanted a generic, I would say go whole food as much as possible. And it doesn't have to be oh, it's changed now. It doesn't
Sorry,
have
I
to
just
be.
decided to pop up that slide in case people are rushing off, just to make sure that they can see your contact
Oh,
details. If
thank
you,
you.
sorry, interrupting. If you do have specific questions or you want to learn more, then that's Susie's contact details there as well. Sorry, Susie, you finish up.
That's right. No, I was just saying, go whole foods. If you were making like lunch, you could just do a salad, you can buy the leaves, you can buy tomatoes, all of that. A tin of chickpeas, chuck them on top. That's going to be a lot better than getting a
Yeah.
vegetarian
And
sausage.
often we think that cooking is going to take a really long time and it's going to involve lots of complicated ingredients and processes, but it can just be really, really simple in that sense. So we are coming up to the end of time. So much to unpack there. I've really enjoyed listening to you, Susie. So much really good advice and so interesting to understand that connection with our nervous system and how that stress response impacts on, on our ability to absorb the nutrients in our food and our mood and our energy levels through the day. So thank you so much for that. I've seen just the last comment here. My diet consists of a lot of meat. Will this affect your gut? Again, I know this is going to be very, very different for different people, but having read some interesting facts about meat and the impact on your gut microbiome, I thought I'd let you finish on that one.
The meat one. Um, It depends. So
Yeah.
if, of course, it depends on how you're digesting that meat. If you've got a very robust digestive system and you can break it down well, then it would be okay. Ultra processed meat, so your ham, your sausages, less good. If it's decently reared meat from your local butcher, then meat is very nutritious. So I more often see sick vegans because it's very hard but not impossible to get all the nutrients we need from
Yeah.
a vegan diet. But again, it depends on people's metabolic type and how they deal with that. So some people might thrive on a vegetarian or vegan diet, and for other people it could be the worst thing they could possibly do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going full circle with that message. Listen to your body and, try and follow your instinct of what feels right for you. Right. Okay. We're right up towards the end of the session now. Thank you so much for your time, Susie. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you to everybody who has joined in today's session and for sharing your thoughts and comments. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to stop that
Thank
recording
you.
now.